shrugged, but it was a different gesture altogether. Mortimer's shrug implied there was more to say rather than Baldesh's indifference to the question. Magister Abraham scratched his chin under his long beard, his eyes on Mortimer.
"Why do you think such an odd and heretical thing?"
he asked. He was trying, and failing, to hide that he was pleased.
Vetronius's gladius capitalis, Heraclitus's Samatiphorus Bathi.
Sister Anna winced at his pronunciation of High Archaic, which was the Alban and not the local Moraean. Magister Abraham had the odd habit of tapping his teeth with his fingers, and he did so. When he had ink in his fingers, he sometimes stained his teeth. He nodded.
"Yes, the fell sword. A weapon that will perform the same way in the real and in the ethereal implies that it can be forged inside the memory palace and then used anywhere."
He allowed himself a slight smile.
"What would be the result of such a use inside the memory palace?"
He paused for a heartbeat, and 15 students paled to think of the literal destruction of the carefully tended memories and workings.
"But you wouldn't know, would you, Mortimer?"
Magister Abraham asked. It was a rhetorical question. Now it was the Magister's turn to shrug.
"Scamper off, little ones. Alchemy is waiting for you. Mortimer, stay."
The other students hurried out, many with heads bent to avoid catching the master's eye. He sometimes issued work at the end, massive lightning strikes of work, carefully or carelessly applied. Mortimer sat and fiddled with his paternoster until the last student left, and then rose as gracefully as his fast-growing body could manage, and went to face the master. The older man frowned.
"You have a brilliant mind," he said, "and you work harder than most of these louts."
He shrugged and handed Mortimer a rolled scroll.
"I'm sorry, young man. Sorry to twit you on your failings, and sorry to have to give you this."
Mortimer didn't even need to open it.
"Summons? From the Patriarch?"
The Magister nodded and left the classroom. As he opened the door, Mortimer heard Baldesh's voice, and Zervas, another Moraean student, say something, and they all laughed. He had no way to know if they were talking about him, but he hated them all in that moment. The summons in his hand meant that he would be tested one more time for powers, and if he could muster none, he'd be sent forth. He'd worked his whole life to come here, and now he'd failed. Sometimes it can be very difficult to be a child prodigy. Morgan Mortimer was 16 and growing so fast that none of his clothes fit properly. His face was so young that despite his size, he could, at times, easily pass for 12. He was tall and thin, but not in the way that might have given him authority or dignity. He was gawky and, even worse, covered in adolescent acne that burst constantly into white-headed pustules all over his face, so that the Moraean sisters in his practical philosophy class called him the Plague. And Morgan knew he was the Plague. He was too young to be at the school, and worst of all, and for all his phenomenal intelligence, he lacked any ability to manipulate the world directly through phantasmia, or even through alchemy. He had all the potential in the world. He just couldn't get a grip on the raw stuff of power. He couldn't make potentia into ops. But he was intelligent enough to know when he was not wanted, and no one in the great school of higher philosophy and metaphysics wanted any part of him except as a scapegoat. They didn't want him to quote the authorities he'd memorized, or to explain to them the fine points of how the ethereal worked in terms of Mathematica. They wanted him to wield power or leave. He sat in a small tavern in the greatest city in the civilized world and stared into a cup of wine. After a while, he stared into another, and then a third. All day, every day, his magisters had thrust him into situations meant to unlock his powers. His